the main question, what can science contribute to sustainability, opportunities and limits of transdisciplinary research? Thank you again for inviting me. I feel really delighted to be among this very distinguished audience, and I'm looking also forward to the discussion and the other papers. I would like to start with the conditions under which transdisciplinary research takes place. And there are three major global transformations that we face right now. The first one is the globalization as well as renationalization in the world. We're just facing a renationalization, maybe even a retribalization when we look at the Ukraine war that we're just facing. But also there is a big tension between a globalized economy and maybe a renationalized political system. And that, of course, creates a lot of tension and pressures. The second major transformation is about digitalization. We all know that we are in an era in which digital services have become really the main element of change in industry as well as in communication. We have run from an automation period to a period of having algorithms take place and take care of many of our industrial activities, and now even in terms of that digitalization become autonomized so that they basically make their own decisions and that we have Internet of Things that deal with each other. And the third one, of course, which is of most concern to us, is sustainabilization, which means that we understand that we are reaching planetary boundaries in many of the ecological issues, but also in terms of economic limits and also social limits, and that we need to have a sustainable future in order to have a real good chance for survivability. And that's the main theme of your graduate school. All three major transformations are characterized by the will of large parts of subpopulations to go ahead with these three major changes. So we have strong forces that would like to go more in the direction of globalization, others, of course, the opposite. We have large groups and specifically industrial partners that like to improve and increase the era of digitalization. And we have a lot of NGOs, but also governments that would like to go the path of sustainabilization. Now, these are the kind of desired changes or the changes that are done by human will. We also have non-desired or, let's say, side effects. They are very often unintended. And so we have global environmental changes. We all know climate change, the most prominent one, biodiversity, pollution, environmental health. We see an increase of vulnerability with respect to the interactions between the technological, social, and natural risks, though these seems to be interconnected. And that's why we very often call them systemic risk, because they reach from one system to the other. We have side effects in terms of urbanization, a lot of demographic changes, Japan, of course, Germany, China. We see a lot of migration and very many changes in land use planning. We have a whole set of governance deficits, corruption, renationalization, just talked about it, authoritative leaderships in many countries, neo-imperialism. All of that, of course, is a problem of governance that we can face right now and something that we need to deal with. And we have severe equity problems with respect to opportunities and income and vulnerabilities. So the 10% most wealthy people in the world, of course, have many more opportunities, much better income, and are less vulnerable than the rest of the world. And that gap is unfortunately increasing. Now, what do these trends apply for sustainability? What can we learn from this? Well, first, let me do a definition of sustainability. Sustainability first is an orientation. It means it's not a scientific concept. It is not a description. It's a normative orientation where we would like to go to. So it's something that provides a normative goal. And the goal has two major elements. First, to secure the environmental foundations, and secondly, the humane living conditions for the present and future generations worldwide. And I think important, as I said, it's an orientation, something where we should strive for. Secondly, it has two elements. We want to make sure that the environmental foundations that are necessary for humans to strive are really secured. But above that, we also want that humane living conditions are present and are secured or guaranteed for, and that's the third thing, the present generations. So it's that intergenerational, and also for future generations, so that we can also have these kinds of humane living conditions guaranteed also for the future. And that should be done worldwide. We normally have a division of sustainability into three various columns or segments. One is ecology, which of course leads to environmental foundations, economics, and social and cultural aspects that relate to humane living conditions. And we can also have four, social and cultural divided, and sometimes institutional aspects have been added. But basically, those are the three that have been mentioned in most of the literature. Now, if you look at the dimensions and sub-dimensions of these three major columns, we can see that we can also subdivide them again in three, and that is a little less than what the SDGs, we know those are 17. Here I just put down 9, and in a different order. The SDGs, which I come to later, are ordered according to the substance of what needs to be secured. This is basically related to the goals that need to be accomplished. And in ecology, we have three major goals. One is decarbonization, so to get rid of all fossil fuel combustion within the next 20 to 30 years, and also to see that we have less greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, specifically from agriculture, from consumption, from production, and of course from energy production, which of course is the main contributor. The second is dematerialization, using less material. That also means less emissions and less waste. So to dematerialize the economy, that's the second major goal here. And the last one is renaturalization, meaning that we need more intact bio and ecosystems that would provide the necessary ecological services to humans, but also to nature in general. And that it's not enough that we keep the nature that we still have. We actually have to renaturalize some of the areas that we have cultivated or changed over time in order to keep the critical infrastructure, natural infrastructure alive. If you look at the economy, again, we have three major goals. One is circular economy, which links to the ecological dimensions. Circular economy basically means that through the whole life cycle, we see that we do decarbonize, do dematerialize, and do renaturalize, so less land use, and that all the material that we use are either recycled or reused, or if that's not possible, being somehow treated in a way that it is compatible with nature. Second major point is lasting quality of life and work. So it's something that leads to quality of life. It's not just comfort, it's not just income, it's quality of life and work. And that quality can also be done with less money, but it should have a strong impact on the way that we organize economic activities. And the last thing is that we have a dynamic adaptation to changing environmental conditions. So we do need innovations over time, but these innovations should be linked to sustainability goals. And then the last one, social and cultural dimension. The first one, of course, which has always been related to sustainability, social justice, so for today, as well as for tomorrow, intergenerational justice. We certainly would like to see peaceful conflict resolution, because war, as you can just see, is the worst enemy for sustainability. And individual social identity and cultural meaning, something that we see threatened partially by globalization, but partially by new lifestyles, and that people don't find the kind of social identity needed to have a fulfilling life. So these are the kind of 9 dimensions that we would think are important when we look at sustainability. Now, I talked already about the SDGs. Those are the 17, you're probably very familiar with them. They have a different way of ordering things because they order according to resources like water and land and air and so on, but also in terms of this kind of substances like health, education, equality, and others. So they are kind of the way that you can implement these goals in order to have the right applications available. So that's extremely important. And the good thing about these SDGs is that they have been approved by almost all countries in the world. There are, of course, conflicts between some of them, like, number 9 and 3. So you may have trade-offs to do, but in general, they also provide a very good orientation. Now, having said this about the context, the major challenges for sustainability sciences can then be derived. And the major challenges, I put 4 of them here on my slide. The first one is that we have a major increase in scientific studies and analysis on sustainability, on climate change, on biodiversity, on circular economy. However, what we can see is they don't have a major impact on the success of sustainability, climate protection, and resilient structural changes. So we have something that has been very often described as a main gap between knowledge and action, specifically political action. So what we can observe is that we have a lot of insights into sustainability, but they do not have major impact on political actions. And we can see it in climate change. We have one conference after another, one IPCC report after another, and the CO2 emissions are basically either still increasing or keeping constant. But what we need to have to get them down to 0 seems to be extremely far away, and we lose more and more time because nothing really dramatic happens in terms of CO2 reductions. A second point is that we have a plurality of knowledge claims. Science is not the only knowledge provider that counts. In a political realm, we have a lot of ideologies. We have other types of knowledge, political knowledge, social knowledge, knowledge that comes from various stakeholder groups, and they all compete with scientific knowledge. And that, of course, makes it more difficult also for policymakers to know what knowledge counts and what knowledge is really important, and what is true and what is not true. So we have the whole issue of fake news, of conspiracy theories, and you name it. There is missing bridges, and I get back to that, between knowledge and action. We often say, okay, well, we have the knowledge, we don't have the action, but knowledge cannot be transferred into action immediately. There are immediate steps, and we need to really address them. And there is a lack of convincing concepts for transformative and transdisciplinary research. So that's the main topic of this conference this morning, or this afternoon for you, or evening, that we have a lot of interesting ideas how to do transformative disciplinary research, but I don't think there's a unified concept at this point. Now, I said that between action and knowledge, there are a couple of other steps that we need to address. The first is knowledge, which is investigating what is true and what works. Both is important. So what do we know about nature and its rules, and what do we know about society and its rules? But also we need instrumental knowledge to see what can work in terms of policy. From knowledge, the second thing is judgment. And judgment means that we have to balance arguments. It is very often true that we said about the SDGs that there are trade-offs to make between SDGs, or between digitalization and sustainabilization, or between globalization and digitalization. There are always, different competing goals, and good judgment is that we have good methods to balance trade-offs. And I think that's part of the problem that we face, that we very often have competing knowledges, but nobody knows how to resolve that. The third thing is then decision-making, and that always includes setting priorities based on judgments. So we have to say, okay, we cannot do everything at the same time. So we have to do priorities. We have to say this has priority over the other. And of course, it should be based on the distribution of trade-offs. Then is implementation, putting decision into action. And lastly, but is also very often forgotten, is monitoring. We have to review the results, because in complex systems, even if you believe things do what they're supposed to do, they may not do what they are supposed to do, because we just underestimate complex relationships. So monitoring is extremely important. This has led me to a suggestion for a transdisciplinary concept of science, which I have published in Futures last year, and saying that if you want to address these challenges that I mentioned before, and also the various steps that need to be done in order to go from knowledge to action, we need 3 types of research. The first one, of course, is one that we all are familiar with. It's classic research. It's curiosity-driven. It is based on methodological rigor. It deals with open questions. It is basically free of values in the beginning. Of course, nobody is free of values, but it's something where we want to be distant from the political discourse and just make sure that we understand the world as it is. That is important if we face complex issues, because intuition normally fails. The second major point is goal-oriented investigations. And that means we want to construct coherent strategies to reach a predefined objective or set of objectives, including the assessment of unintended consequences. So if you want to reach a specific goal in terms of sustainability, like decarbonization, like having a climate neutral economy in 2050, we can say, what are the strategies to reach this predefined goal? What needs to be done this year, next year, or 3 years in a row to get to that specific goal? But so it has to be effective, but at the same time, we have to assess what are the non-intended consequences of each of these scenarios. And so they could be not efficient, or they could be not resilient, or they could not be fair. So all of these issues need to be addressed. And that is a very important element of science. And it's different from classic research. So their scientists get a goal and they say, so how can we reach that goal with the least unwanted or unintended consequences? And that's a very important question. Very often we see this type of research related to, let's say, big ministries or to administration, that they want to know, what can we do in order to reach a political goal? The third one is what we call catalytic expertise, and that's analyzing, designing, and facilitating processes to initiate constructive and productive learning sessions among and between different knowledge camps, interest groups, and value orientations. So this is specifically important when we face plurality of knowledge claims, which I said is one of the challenges, and if you want to go from knowledge to judgment to decision-making. And now we need a better architecture of how to deal with different stakeholders, how to deal with different political convictions, how to deal with public preferences. And that is not something done that you can do in an ivory tower. You have to go out and deal with these people, have discourses with them, have public participation initiatives. All of that is very important. And the word catalytic means that the experts that come here are experts on process. So they're not expert on the content, but they know how to design processes that can really help to bridge the gap between knowledge and action. And that then can relate to 4 functions that scientific evidence can produce. The first one, and that deals specifically with the classic model of science, and that's enlightenment, to inform policymakers about complex relationships. It's very important that people are enlightened to know something about it. Secondly is orientation, because sustainability is an orientation, providing assistance for foresight, vision, and planning, and that's specifically important for the second one, which I said, their strategies. The third one is even more related to strategies. That's instrumental and strategic planning. That the predefined goals. So we elicit different strategies, make an assessment of the strategies, make trade-off analysis, and then can help decision makers to prioritize. And then the last thing is co-creation, which of course relates to the catalytic function that's developing new insights and orientation knowledge together with plural knowledge camps, together with change agents. So those are the four functions of scientific evidence. So that is the way that science can contribute to policy making and to better strategies in the direction of sustainability. This all is needed in terms of an integrated approach. Policymakers need scientific support in all four substantive fields. They need to be enlightened, they need to be oriented, they need to have good ideas about strategies, and they need to know what kind of processes can co-create the knowledge and the actions needed to get to better sustainable conditions. These different needs require special discourse formats that have their own normative rules and implementation criteria. That's an important, there's not one recipe that will deal with the whole science input and sustainability transformations. We need different discourse formats. Some of them are very traditional, like workshops and consensus conferences. Others may be more innovative, like mini publics or citizen assemblies. They have different discourse formats in way that we as scientists can actually help policymakers to make progress in terms of sustainability. So complex sustainability problems demand combinations of different discourses. They may start as an epistemic discourse about what is true. They may lead to orientation and strategy discourses. How can we reach the goal that we want to have? And might end up as an exercise in co-creation. What kind of processes can lead us so that what we all want can actually be implemented? This leads me to my conclusions. First, there's a new role for science. There's a focus on three major scientific concepts. The first one is curiosity-driven, a kind of classic concept where we can see what are the insights about the grammar of nature and society, so that we understand better causal or functional relationships. And their methodological rigor is very important. It's very important to keep the rules of the various disciplines. It can be interdisciplinary. It doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's good also to remain within the boundaries of a discipline, but it provides the basic knowledge that we need for all the other tasks. The second one is a goal-oriented strategic instrumental concept where we know what we want, but we don't know how to get there. So we need better knowledge to tell us how to get to a desired stage in society and what kind of options we have to reach that specific goal. And the last one is process-oriented catalytic concept, which means what kind of processes do we need to either invent or to implement so that all the stakeholders and all the political powers or the citizens, whoever is addressed, is first informed about all of this and secondly motivated to make the changes that are needed. So we need new and better processes within the principles of democracy. Secondly, there's a need for an integrated governance approach, providing understanding, orientation, strategies, and co-production of knowledge and action. That is basically an implication of the three major scientific concepts. We want to make sure that policymakers understand the issue, so that's kind of enlightenment. We want to see that they know about the goals and how to reach them, so that's orientation. We want to tell them what kind of strategies are there or options there so that they understand the trade-offs, but also the unintended consequences of each of these options, and secondly, how we can design or co-produce a way forward in ways that knowledge and action can be combined. And lastly, in order to be effective in co-production of knowledge and action, there's a strong need for including scientific, but also political, economic, and civil society actors, as well as affected citizens. For each of them, we have different types of discourses that may help. Within science, we have more epistemic discourses. Within the political system, we have parliaments, we have all kinds of bodies that deal with it. Within the economic sector, we have all kinds of corporate governance. The civil society actors, so we have roundtables to combine them in order to make sure that their voices are heard. And with affected citizens, disorganized citizens, and we have new instruments like citizen assemblies or mini publics, as it's called in France, that can help also to get the preferences of the citizens. And so all of these are needed for the co-production of knowledge and action.